I'm Nora Whitman, 31 years old. I'm a filmmaker, a daughter, and for most of my life, the silent one at the family table. 3 months ago, I returned to my hometown in Vermont for my father's retirement gala. Judge Louis Whitman, beloved, respected, celebrated. But I wasn't there to applaud. I was there with a camera, and a truth my family had buried for 17 years. When they left my mother out of the tribute speech and left me at table 12 by the kitchen doors, I stood up and gave the speech they didn't see coming. Before I share what happened next and what I uncovered about my mother's death, drop a comment and let me know if you've ever felt erased in your own family. If this story finds you, maybe it's because it was always meant for you. Sometimes family feels like fiction. That was the first line I recorded into my phone, sitting in the departures lounge at SeaTac, sipping overpriced green tea and trying not to psych myself out. I was recording an intro for my personal docuseries, working title, Where the Silence Lives. I adjusted the camera, checked the frame. My face looked thinner than the last time I'd seen them. 3 years does that to you. Or maybe it's just the way unresolved grief shapes your jaw. I'm flying back to Asheville tomorrow. It's my dad's retirement celebration. 35 years on the bench. Honorable Judge Louis Whitman. That's what they'll call him on the plaque. That's what they'll say in the newspaper write-up. But this trip, it's not about his legacy. Not really. I'm hoping it's a moment of reconnection. A thread I can still tie back. Or maybe cut clean. We'll see. I ended the recording. The hum of gate announcements filled the space like static I couldn't switch off. I didn't expect warmth when I arrived in Vermont, but I didn't expect frostbite either. Asheville is the kind of New England town people frame on postcards. Tree-lined streets, white steeples, Main Street diners. Underneath, it's colder. Not just in winter, in memory. My Uber crawled past the familiar signs. Whitman and Sons Law Office, the old bank my uncle used to run, and the library where Mom used to host her watercolor workshops. I didn't stop. I was heading to the Asheville Inn, 2 miles outside town. The family home was full, I'd been told. Logistics, the email said. Logistics felt like an excuse in press slacks. Truthfully, I didn't fight it. I didn't want to sleep under that roof again. The cedar walls were soaked in ghosts. Dad's email had been brief but polite. We'd be honored if you could attend the ceremony, Nora. Everyone will be there. Bryce has been helping plan things. I hope you can make it. It read like something he'd have his secretary draft. Except he doesn't have one anymore. I heard Elaine retired 2 years ago. I hadn't seen Bryce since Aunt Carol's funeral. He'd given me a 2-second nod and gone back to pouring coffee, like I was someone from high school he barely remembered. I used to follow him everywhere as a kid. Now I wouldn't trust him to hand me a glass of water without a side eye. I dropped my suitcase in the hotel room, perfectly neutral decor, like it had signed an NDA not to offend, and changed into jeans and a black tee. Nothing said emotionally armored, like a blank canvas. The ceremony wasn't until tomorrow night, but I wanted to see the town before it swallowed me whole. The air outside was sharp. Vermont in March never promises spring. Just the illusion of it, like so much else in Asheville. I parked outside the courthouse, stared up at the stone building that bore my last name on a wing Dad helped fund. A career built on judgment, a house run on silence. I used to think the gavel was just part of his job. Later I realized he never put it down, even at dinner. Bryce used to say Dad could sentence someone without opening his mouth. He wasn't wrong. I took a few test shots for the doc, long tracking shot of the courthouse, then a slow pan toward the steps. I'd narrate later. I knew I was stalling. I didn't want to go home, and yet I already was. It's strange, the way places hold memory. The diner where Mom used to meet friends on Sundays is now a Pilates studio. Our old ice cream parlor, a vape shop. Time eats everything, but it digests unevenly. Still, part of me felt hopeful. Maybe 3 years had softened edges. Maybe Dad wanted a real conversation. Maybe Bryce, no. That's where I stopped myself. Hope is dangerous when it's dressed as delusion. Back in the hotel, I propped up the camera again. Tomorrow is my dad's retirement celebration. People will shake his hand, praise his integrity. They'll talk about justice, fairness, the legacy of Louis Whitman, but not about my mother, or my absence. Or the things we've buried under the marble floor of that perfect little house. I paused. My finger hovered over the record button. I came back hoping for reconnection, but sometimes you come home, and instead of healing, you walk into a crime scene. The body isn't fresh, but the blood never really dried. Click. Record off. Tomorrow everything would begin, or unravel. I was 13 when Mom died. It was mid-January, the kind of winter where the air slices your lungs with each breath, and the sky forgets how to be anything but gray. One day she was there, humming Patsy Cline, while loading the dishwasher. The next, her car slid off County Road 4 and wrapped itself around a pine. They said it was the ice. Black ice, Dad muttered to the sheriff on the phone. He didn't cry. Neither did Bryce. I tried, but it came out in staccato gasps that didn't feel real, like I was pretending for a camera no one was holding. The funeral was a blur of casseroles, floral arrangements, and condolences with too much perfume. But what I remember most is the silence. It wasn't grief. Grief is messy, chaotic, human. This was sterile, surgical. Dad went back to work 3 days later, black suit still crisp. Bryce disappeared into his room for hours, blasting angry music I didn't recognize. I started making dinner because no one else did. That was the year everything froze. The air, the house, the people. Before the accident, we were not perfect, but full. Mom was light. She filled rooms like warm lamplight. She taught art at the local middle school and believed in homemade costumes and Sunday blueberry pancakes. Dad was order, Bryce was motion. I was the bridge, the quiet observer, always trying to keep the peace. Like duct tape over a cracked vase. Bryce used to be my hero. 4 years older, he taught me how to ride a bike, how to climb trees barefoot without shredding your toes. He once punched a kid for calling me weird in 3rd grade. He told me I was weird too, but that it was a superpower. After Mom died, that boy vanished. He stopped meeting my eyes. Everything I said seemed to annoy him. "You're just playing the good daughter now," he spat once, when I offered to help him study for an algebra test. "I'm just trying to help." "No, you're trying to earn points with him. Good luck with that." That him was our father, Nora Whitman, a man who measured emotion in court transcripts and rarely lost control. His version of mourning was taking longer walks and buying a second bourbon after dinner. He never told us how she died. Not really. He just said, "She lost control." Looking back, I think we all did. The turning point came 6 months later, when Bryce got into a fight at school. Something about a girl, a rumor, fists. The details were fuzzy. What mattered was the outcome. Military academy in Florida. Dad called it structure. Bryce called it exile. I still remember the night before he left. I knocked on his door with a peanut butter sandwich. His favorite, still crusts cut off. "Don't do this," I said. "Don't let him send you away." His reply was a bitter laugh. "He's not sending me away, Nora. He's choosing you." The door closed, soft but final. I didn't see him again for almost 2 years. By the time he returned, something had hardened in both of us. We said the right things. "How was school? You look taller." But the warmth never came back. We circled each other like cautious animals, pretending not to remember we once shared a world. Dad never acknowledged the divide. He treated our estrangement like a phase. "You kids will get over it," he said once. I almost laughed. It wasn't a cold we could sleep off. It was a quiet war, and the front lines were everywhere. Dinner tables, family trips, birthdays with separate corners. When I left for NYU, I didn't tell Bryce. Just packed my things, hugged Dad goodbye, and drove off in a borrowed Jeep. It was the cleanest escape I could manage. What followed were years of polite distance, the kind you can wrap in civility and send through the mail with Christmas cards. I built a life around cameras, scripts, and control. In film, you can edit out the uncomfortable parts. Family doesn't give you that luxury. We reunited once, awkwardly, at Aunt Carol's funeral. He nodded. I nodded back. That was it. I left before dessert. Now, after everything, I was heading home. And part of me, the stubborn, foolish part, still hoped that maybe Bryce remembered who we were before the cold came. Before grief turned us into versions of ourselves we didn't recognize. I sat in the hotel bed, laptop open, scanning through old photos for a sequence I wanted to include in the doc. There it was, us at age 7 and 11, covered in mud from the riverbank, grinning like fools. That version of us was gone. But the image, still, refused to fade. We were kids when the frost came in, I whispered into the mic, but we were the ones who let it stay. Tomorrow I would see him again, my brother, the boy who once saved me from bullies, and the man who didn't save me from silence. Leaving was easy. Staying gone, that was the part no one warns you about. I left Asheville when I was 17 with 2 suitcases, a partial scholarship to NYU, and a stomach full of guilt I hadn't named yet. College gave me language, lenses, and enough emotional distance to believe that clarity would follow. It didn't. I majored in film, mostly because it was the only way I could make silence feel like it meant something. I liked the control of it, the cutting, the framing, the way you could rearrange time. When real life refused to answer questions, the edit room gave you something close to truth. Seattle came next. Bigger skies, less history, more rain. I found work on a local documentary team. Scrappy, underfunded, real stories. By 28 I was directing. Not features, but good work, honest work. And no one asked about Vermont. I kept in touch with Dad, in the loose, transactional way distant families do. Holiday calls, LinkedIn shares, the occasional forwarded newspaper clipping about someone we used to know. Our conversations were safe, surface level, sanitized. As for Bryce, he slipped out of my orbit entirely. I heard his name now and then, mostly through Dad's reluctant mentions. Your brother's helping with the firm now, or Bryce just closed on a lake property. Small talk dressed up in family fabric. 3 years ago, I came back for Aunt Carol's funeral. That was the last time. No one brought up Mom. Not once. And I was too tired to be the one to break the silence, so I let them get away with it. When the email came last month from Dad, subject line, invitation to retirement celebration, I almost deleted it without opening. The Honorable Louis Whitman will be recognized for 35 years of service to the judicial community. A formal celebration will take place at Asheville Hall. Your presence would be meaningful. That last line caught me off guard. Meaningful. It wasn't his style. Dad didn't deal in emotional currency. That one word pulled me back in like a hook. I didn't RSVP right away. I reread the email 5 times before calling my assistant to block off the weekend. I told her I was filming on location. That was true, just not professionally. The idea for the doc had been forming for over a year. Working title, The Other Table. The concept? Emotional estrangement. Families divided not by physical space, but by silent decisions. I'd started outlining it using borrowed stories, until I realized I had one that wasn't borrowed at all, my own. I didn't tell Dad I was bringing a camera, or that I'd be filming parts of the event. I'd keep it discreet. At first, Asheville hadn't changed much. Its predictability was almost offensive. The same white church, same diner, same half-empty bookstore. But something in me had shifted. I was no longer the girl returning home. I was a woman entering a case file that had never been closed. At the hotel, I laid out my old tapes, journal notes, and photos from childhood. Each artifact a breadcrumb, each one leading back to the night she died, and the silence that swallowed everything after. No one had ever said the word suicide. Not out loud. They said accident, like it was gentler. Easier to blame a patch of ice than face what we never dared ask. Mom had been vibrant, messy, alive. The kind of person who wore too many bracelets and sang along to the wrong notes in the car. Her absence didn't just hollow out the house, it rewrote all of us. We didn't just lose her. We lost the version of us that existed when she was here. Dad hardened, Bryce fractured, I disappeared. Different coping mechanisms, same funeral. Now, they wanted to celebrate legacy. Legacy built on clean records and curated stories. But I knew there was more. And I wasn't coming back to decorate the surface. I came to find what was underneath. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room full of people clapping for my father's career. What they didn't know was that I was already filming the opening to a different story. One that didn't end with applause. The house looked the same. That was the first disappointment. Same wraparound porch, same split-rail fence that creaked in the wind, same uneven stone path that Mom used to sweep after every fall storm. Only this time, the porch light didn't flicker on when I pulled into the gravel driveway. No one stepped out to greet me. I hadn't expected a banner, but I didn't expect to feel like a guest in the place that once knew my laughter, my footprints, my Sunday morning voice cracking through Sweet Caroline. I rang the doorbell. It was Bryce who answered. Of course it was. Hey, he said, with that fake casual tone people use when they don't want to admit they're uncomfortable or surprised. Hey, I mirrored, shifting my weight. You look taller. He smiled tightly. I've been this height since I was 16, but sure. Come in. The entryway still smelled like cedar and lemon polish. And tension. Family tension always lingers like mildew. Hard to see, easy to smell. I thought Dad would be here. They didn't have to erase me loudly. They just needed time. And enough small omissions. The next morning, I woke up to soft knocking on my hotel room door. When I opened it, a cream-colored envelope sat on the floor. No name, just a wax seal with my father's initials, LW inside, a program for the retirement gala. I flipped through it absently until I reached the final page. With gratitude to those who shaped this legacy, there was a photo of Dad in his robe, arms crossed, proud. Beside him, Bryce. Below that, a list of acknowledgements, court clerks, former partners, a few town leaders. And there, third from the bottom, Caleb Sterling, mentee and godson. No mention of me, not even a footnote. I closed the booklet like it had burned my hands. My name had been in this family since birth. Apparently, it just didn't make the cut for print. The next time I saw Elaine was at the post-event brunch Dad was hosting at the house. I didn't want to go. But if I've learned anything about control, it's that you sometimes get it back by walking straight into the fire. She greeted me at the entryway with a polite smile, the kind that makes your skin itch. Nora, she said, how lovely to see you again. Again? I raised an eyebrow. I don't think we've actually spoken in 10 years. Her smile didn't falter. Time blurs things, doesn't it? No, I replied. Time reveals them. She blinked but didn't answer, just turned and moved toward the kitchen, where trays of finger sandwiches and fresh fruit were being arranged like offerings to gods who'd already made their judgments. Bryce came in through the back door with Caleb in tow. Same suit from the night before, but the collar was loosened now. Relaxed. At home. Morning, he said, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You two met? I turned to Caleb. He was probably 22, polished, sharp, the kind of kid who used silence like a scalpel. Briefly, I said. You were at table 1. He nodded. Nice to meet you, Nora. His voice was steady, pleasant, but his eyes had already catalogued me, dismissed me. Your dad's godson. I am. He's been a big part of my life since I was 16. I did the math. That would have been the year I left for college. The year everything still felt salvageable. Apparently, while I was trying to figure out my own identity on the other side of the country, Dad had started grooming a replacement right under our roof. What do you plan to do? I asked. Law school, he answered, hoping to take the bar in 2 years, maybe join Bryce at the firm eventually. Bryce smiled like a proud father. He's sharp, disciplined. Reminds me of Dad in the early days. Does he? I said. Funny, I don't remember you ever saying that about me. Bryce didn't flinch. You were never interested in law. I was interested in belonging, I said, before I could stop myself. Apparently, I just didn't read enough case briefs to qualify. I walked out onto the back patio, gripping the edge of the railing like it could anchor me to something real. The air was cool and clean, untouched by politics or dynamics or the weight of being passed over. Dad eventually joined me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just handed me a cup of coffee like nothing needed explaining. You always liked mornings out here, he said. I liked Mom out here, I replied, quiet but firm. He looked down. She'd have been proud of you. Would she? I said. Because right now I don't even know if you are. He sighed. Not dramatic, just tired. Bryce and Caleb have been here, he said. They've helped. They've kept things running. I turned to him. So you reward proximity with legacy? His eyes finally met mine. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. He didn't argue. I watched a pair of birds land on the fence, flit toward the feeder. They moved in sync, instinctual. No one had to explain their place. I'm not angry because you mentored someone, I said. I'm angry because you replaced me in silence. Like I wouldn't notice, like it didn't matter. I didn't replace you, he said. You erased me, I corrected. One footnote at a time. Later that day, I visited the town library, not to research, just to breathe somewhere familiar. Behind the desk was Linda Marsh, the same librarian who used to sneak me extra stickers for summer reading. She recognized me instantly. Nora Whitman, she smiled. Still carrying a camera everywhere? Still trying to figure out where to point it, I said. She leaned in. You know, your mother used to come in here every Tuesday. Always in the poetry section. Said it helped her make sense of grief. I paused. I don't think she ever stopped grieving. Linda nodded slowly. Some people carry grief like a backpack. Others like a second spine. She looked around, then added, I still keep some of her things. Sketches, notes. If you want to see them sometime. I nodded. I do. That night, I uploaded the raw footage of the brunch. Bryce laughing, Caleb speaking confidently, Elaine moving through the house like a woman who knew where every line had been drawn. And by whose hand. Inheritance isn't always about money, I said in the voiceover. Sometimes it's the story people choose to pass down, and the people they choose to leave out. He's at the event site doing a final walkthrough. You just missed him. Right. There were boxes near the stairs, decorations, folders, a catering schedule. Bryce moved toward them, almost relieved to turn his back. Just to avoid any confusion, he added, not looking at me. We've booked you a room at the Ashevale Inn. We weren't sure when you were arriving, and with Elaine's niece staying here too, it got tight. Elaine's niece. That was new. I blinked. You're saying there wasn't room in the house where I grew up? He hesitated. It's nothing personal, just logistics. There it was again. That word. Logistics. It was becoming a family heirloom, passed down and weaponized. Thanks for the heads up, I said flatly. Guess I'll grab my key and head over. Don't want to step on the wrong floorboard. Bryce exhaled, almost amused. Nora, you don't have to be sharp all the time. No, I said. Just when people pretend a disinvite is hospitality. I turned to leave. He didn't follow. Ashevale Inn was cozy in the sterile way. Reclaimed wood, neutral tones, a fireplace no one used. The front desk clerk was polite enough. She handed me a key in a cream envelope labeled Nora Whitman in a stranger's handwriting. Room 202, the window overlooked the parking lot. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. One dress for the event, a black wrap, sensible heels. Nothing that said look at me, just enough to say I still exist. There was a knock at the door around 7. Room service. A card on the tray. From Dad. Thought you might be tired. Chicken soup and a crusty roll. A peace offering and broth. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened my laptop and began stitching footage from the courthouse and the town square. I watched myself in the frame, composed, detached, camera ready. Then I added a new voiceover. Sometimes families don't exile you with slams and screams. They do it with polite smiles, booked rooms, and reassigned bedrooms. They call it convenience. You feel it like a slow erasure. The next day was the ceremony. Ashevale Hall had been transformed. Soft gold lighting, tables dressed in navy linen, florals in white and green, the Whitman colors. I arrived early, camera tucked in my tote, my heels clicking sharp against the marble. The hostess checked the list. Ah, Nora Whitman. You're at table 12. I scanned the layout. Table 12 was in the back, near the kitchen doors. My table mates? A retired librarian, 2 high school teachers, and my old pediatrician's wife. I bit back a laugh. It wasn't even subtle. They hadn't put me at a table. They'd put me at the other table, and at the center of it all, table 1, front and glowing, Dad, Bryce, Elaine, 2 cousins, and a young man I didn't recognize. Dad caught my eye, lifted his glass. I nodded back. It was Bryce who leaned over and whispered something to the young man. The kid turned, glanced at me, then returned to his water glass. Later I'd learn his name. Caleb. Dad's godson, they said. Pre-law, Columbia, quiet, polished, present. I watched as they laughed, passed bread, toasted legacies. Not once did anyone gesture for me to come over. You don't need to scream to be silenced, I recorded that night, whispering into my mic, the event footage scrolling behind me. Sometimes they just seat you by the exit and act surprised when you disappear. Every lie in this town wears a Sunday dress. A few days after the brunch, I walked into the Asheville Public Library with my camera hidden beneath a worn canvas tote. Not to film, not yet, just to follow instinct. Linda Marsh, the librarian who once let me read in the adult section before I was technically allowed, was working behind the counter. She looked up and smiled in a way that didn't pity me, just knew, like people who've quietly survived the same storm. "You're still here," she said. "Longer than expected," I replied. "Seems like Asheville has unfinished business with me." She tilted her head. "Or maybe it's the other way around." I hesitated, then leaned in. "Linda, do you remember anything about the accident? The one that killed my mom?" Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes stiffened. "I remember what was said," she answered carefully. "And I remember what wasn't." That was enough of an invitation. We met later that afternoon in the archive room, a place that smelled like yellowed paper and regret. Linda unlocked a drawer near the back and pulled out a manila folder. Thin, unassuming. "I never was one for rumors," she said. "But I've worked in this town long enough to know when silence is strategic." Inside was a photocopy of a probate filing from 17 years ago, shortly after the accident, and a single name stood out on the property reassignment form. Elaine Thatcher, grantee of residential deed, 17 Clearwater Drive. My mother's name stripped from it, reassigned within 6 weeks of her death. "Wait," I said slowly. "That house was in Mom's name. She inherited it from her aunt. That wasn't part of Dad's assets." Linda nodded. "Which is why this struck me as strange at the time. The deed wasn't reassigned to your father. It was rerouted through Elaine, quietly, no probate objections, no public notification." "Was there a will?" Linda's mouth tightened. "If there was, it never passed through here." I sat back. Something cold slid into my gut. A house removed from the record. A will that disappeared. A woman, Mom, erased from memory the same way I'd been from the gala program. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. I thanked Linda and left the library with the file tucked into my coat. A truth that small could still collapse the version of the past they'd built. Back at the hotel, I cross-checked the dates again. The car crash was January 14th. Elaine took over title March 3rd. 6 weeks. Enough time for grief to dull. Enough time to rearrange paper trails. I dialed the county records office, asked about probate filings from 2008. The clerk on the line sounded distracted. "No, nothing contested on that property. Everything passed clean. Looks like an internal affidavit of heirship filed by the spouse." "But the transfer wasn't to the spouse," I said. He paused. "That's uncommon. Can you send me that affidavit?" "I'll email what we have." When it arrived an hour later, I opened the PDF and froze. Filed and signed by Nora Whitman, my father, with Elaine listed as successor trustee to an uncontested estate. No will, no witness signature from Bryce or me. Just 2 names, a timestamp, and a notarized stamp from an attorney now long retired. A signature becomes a scalpel when it carves out truth. And my father had wielded it like a surgeon. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, the folder open beside me. Pages fanned like wings of a dead bird. Caleb's name wasn't on anything, yet. But if Dad could erase my mother from her own estate, what stopped him from building a whole new line of succession, one polite brunch at a time? I pressed record on my audio track. When someone dies, what you inherit isn't just property. It's the narrative, it's what gets repeated at reunions, what gets printed in programs. What gets left off the record is just as important as what's on it. And I'm starting to realize, my mother didn't just die, she was rewritten. The next morning, I made one more stop before confronting anyone. I walked to the house on Clearwater Drive, the house Mom used to call her retreat. It was painted a new color now, but the oak tree in front still bore the same crooked swing we'd hung together one summer. I stood across the street, staring at the place that used to hold my childhood. And then I took out my phone and hit record. I don't know who signed what. I don't know when the decision was made to erase her, but I remember this swing. And I remember what her voice sounded like when she said, "This is the only thing that ever felt like mine." She had been stripped of more than just a house. They took her voice. And now it was mine to return. The banquet hall had been reset for the final gala. White linens, gold-rimmed glasses. A string quartet hummed in the corner. playing some neutral classical piece that filled the silence without challenging it. I sat at the same outer table, seat card marked Nora Whitman in generic font. Still peripheral, still outside the frame. But this time, I wasn't there to be included. I was there to speak. At the front, the mayor of Asheville raised her glass to toast my father's career. A legacy of justice, she said. A man who always put truth before comfort. Truth before comfort. I almost laughed out loud. Dad took the podium next, confident, controlled, the practiced tone of someone who delivered verdicts for a living. He thanked the community, thanked Bryce for his steadfast support, thanked Elaine for her years of loyalty. Then, eyes pausing on Caleb, he smiled. And to Caleb, he said, whose dedication to the law gives me hope for the future. I waited. My name didn't come. No mention, no acknowledgement, not even a polite footnote. I stood up. A soft scrape of chair legs broke the polite rhythm of the room. Heads turned. Glasses paused midair. Dad froze at the mic. I wasn't planning to speak, I said, voice even. But I think it's time someone else said something real. There was a beat of silence, then reluctant nods. Permission by discomfort. I walked toward the front. My boots echoed on the polished floor, loud in a way that felt intentional, deliberate. I grew up in this town, I began. I played Little League in Asheville Park. I sat in the front row of my mom's art classes. My mother, Nora Whitman, died when I was 13. A few people nodded solemnly. But what you may not know, or what you were told not to ask, is that she didn't die in an accident. She died by suicide. And she left a letter none of us were ever allowed to see. A ripple spread across the room. Forks clinked against plates. Caleb's expression went still. I found court records, I continued. And they tell a story that's very different from the one my family has repeated for years. One where my mother's name was erased. One where her house was reassigned in silence. Where the will she wrote disappeared. And where Elaine suddenly became the trustee of things that never belonged to her. Elaine shifted uncomfortably at her table, lips tight. Bryce sat rigid beside her, jaw clenched. But that's not even the most painful part, I said. The real pain is knowing that this legacy, this shiny, polished story, was built by burying the woman who built half of it. My voice didn't tremble. It was steel under frost. I was written out of this narrative the same way she was, bit by bit, table by table. I was pushed to the edge so no one would notice the missing parts. I turned toward my father. And you let it happen. The room was silent, still. Even the violinist had stopped. Bryce stood suddenly. Enough, he said loud. Don't turn this into a vendetta. Don't do this here. This is Dad's night. I met his eyes. Dad had 30 years of nights. 30 years of being called fair, honest, noble. He can handle 5 minutes of truth. Bryce opened his mouth, but it wasn't him who spoke next. Actually, a woman's voice cut in, from a table near the middle. I remember Clara saying she'd drafted a will. She asked me to witness it, but your dad said it wasn't necessary, told me not to mention it again. It was Ms. Langley, my old art teacher. Next to her, Mr. Darnell, the retired probate attorney, raised his glass slightly. I never saw it myself, he said, but everyone in the legal circle heard rumors that Clara's affairs were redirected. A silence built not by absence but by design was finally cracking. Elaine rose from her seat. This is inappropriate, she said. These are private matters. No, I said calmly. They were made private to protect reputations, and they only stayed private because no one pushed back. Caleb looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His eyes met mine for a moment. Not defensive, just uncertain. I turned back to the crowd. I'm not asking for applause. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking you to remember Nora Whitman as more than a footnote, and to ask yourselves why the people we honor are often the ones who built their legacies on silence. With that, I stepped away from the mic. No dramatic exit, no tears, just the sound of silverware gently clattering as the room absorbed the cost of looking away too long. That night, I didn't sleep. But I didn't toss either. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying a lie. I was carrying clarity, and that, strangely, was lighter. Justice, I realized, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about putting someone's name back where it belongs. The morning after the gala, the air in Asheville felt quieter, not peaceful, just paused. Like the whole town had taken a breath, but wasn't sure how to exhale. Dad asked to meet me at the park near the courthouse, same spot where he used to bring me and Bryce when we were kids. We'd throw breadcrumbs to ducks back then, thinking that was what love looked like. Gentle silences, predictable gestures. Now the bench creaked under us with a different weight. He didn't look at me right away. Just watched the small lake, where mist hovered low. "I heard what you said last night," he said. I waited. He finally turned to me. "You were right. That landed harder than I expected. I told myself I did it for the family, that hiding Clara's death, the way it happened, would protect you, protect Bryce, protect legacy. But I see now it just turned us into strangers living inside a curated version of ourselves." I didn't nod. I didn't soften. I just listened. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something small and folded. A photo. Mom, standing in her old studio, hands covered in paint, smiling like she still believed she mattered. "I kept this in my drawer," he said. "Every day. I just didn't know how to talk about her without unraveling everything else. Some truths aren't explosive. They're quiet knives that bleed us slowly when left unspoken. I'm sorry, Nora. I should have let you grieve honestly, should have let her be remembered." My voice came out lower than I meant. "You should have let her be real," he nodded. "I know." We sat like that for a long time, not as father and daughter, not yet, but as two people finally looking at the same page. Later that day, Bryce texted me. "Got time to talk?" I met him at the back steps of the church hall. No crowd, no audience, just us. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "I should have told you," he said. "About Mom, about the letter." I knew, but I didn't want to touch it. "Because it was painful?" I asked. "No, because you would have asked questions I couldn't answer. And I didn't want to admit that I chose Dad's version of events over hers. Loyalty, weaponized in the name of silence." He took a deep breath. "I was angry for years. Thought you got to stay, got to be the good one. But maybe you were just better at surviving in this house. I broke. You adapted. And somehow I resented you for that." I looked at him then. Really looked. Bryce had always been the storm to my stillness, the hammer to my scalpel. But now, for the first time, he looked human. Not reduced, not defeated, just visible. "I'm not asking you to fix everything," he added. "But I don't want to be part of the version of this family that keeps erasing the women who built it." I didn't forgive him in that moment, but I didn't walk away either. That night, Caleb knocked on my motel door. He looked nervous, too polished to be comfortable in disarray. "I don't know what to say," he began. "Then don't rehearse it," I said. He sat down. I thought I was just the lucky kid Mr. Whitman wanted to mentor. I didn't realize I was being groomed to replace you. I didn't respond. "I wasn't trying to take your place. I just thought this was how families worked. You play the part you're handed, stay neutral, don't dig too deep." I tilted my head. "And now," he hesitated. "Now I think being neutral just made me complicit. He wasn't the villain, he was the bystander who benefited." "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. "I just need space to tell the truth, whether or not anyone claps for it." He nodded. "If you need help with your film, I'd like to be part of it, even if it's just carrying equipment." I almost smiled. "Carry your own weight first." The next morning, I walked to the cemetery. No camera, no crew, just me, a thermos of coffee, and a letter I wrote the night before. I placed it at the foot of my mother's gravestone, beside a sprig of lavender. It wasn't a eulogy, it was a welcome back. I didn't pack my bags that Sunday. Instead, I extended my hotel stay. Not because I suddenly felt at home in Asheville, I didn't, but because something in me refused to leave before I'd told the story right. The real story. Not the edited version we'd all rehearsed for decades. I brought my camera out the next morning, not the sleek one I use for interviews, the older one. The one Mom gave me on my 17th birthday, back when she still existed in present tense. This town wasn't just where I was from. It was where everything fractured. So it had to be where I started to rebuild. I began with street shots, faded storefronts, children chasing each other in front of the bakery, That rusted fountain behind the courthouse, everyone pretended wasn't broken. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was the real Asheville. And for once, I didn't feel like I was filming it from the outside. That week, I interviewed Ms. Penner, my 5th grade teacher. She cried when I brought up Mom. She painted a mural for our class, she told me. Covered the whole back wall, but when she passed, the school painted over it. Said it was too emotional for the kids. I caught that on camera, her voice cracking, the way she looked at me, almost guilty. She wasn't erased, Nora, just made smaller. Sometimes the worst betrayal isn't forgetting. It's shrinking someone until they no longer threaten the story. At night, I reviewed footage in my motel room, eating takeout on the bed like I was 22 again. It didn't feel like regression. It felt like returning to the version of me that had dared to imagine more, before family expectations crushed it into obedience. Bryce didn't reach out after the text, but I didn't need him to. That message, maybe we can start from scratch, was enough for now. A seed, not a resolution. I drove out to the lake where Mom used to take me for art picnics. I'd forgotten how quiet it was out there, how the trees seemed to absorb sound instead of echoing it. I set the camera down, turned it toward the empty wooden bench facing the water, and pressed record. Then I sat. No script, no plan, just breath, just presence. Later that day, I added the footage to my editing timeline. I titled the segment, Unseen. On Thursday, I visited the cemetery again. Not to cry, not to speak, just to sit. I ran my fingers across Mom's name. The headstone still looked too clean, too clinical. There was no hint of who she was before the silence swallowed her. I brought flowers, of course, but more than that, I brought a copy of her old sketchbook, the one I'd found boxed up behind the attic insulation. I slipped it behind the bouquet, hidden but present. A quiet act of defiance, of remembrance. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just making sure someone's story isn't dust. 2 days before I flew back to Seattle, I walked past the courthouse square where the gala had taken place. Workers were disassembling the banner that once read, Judge Nora Whitman, a legacy of justice. I looked up at the scaffold, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a daughter denied a seat. I felt like a storyteller, not of fairy tales, but of the hard truths families bury to protect illusions. That night, Bryce finally called. We didn't talk about much. He asked how the motel coffee was. I asked if Dad had said anything more. He hadn't. But before hanging up, he said, I watched your video clip, the one by the lake. You looked whole. I let silence answer for me, because I was starting to believe it might be true. Seattle greeted me with gray skies and the smell of rain clinging to the streets, familiar, unassuming, and somehow grounding. I wheeled my suitcase through my apartment door, dropped it beside the couch, and stared at the quiet space I had left behind weeks ago. The first thing I did wasn't unpack. I opened my editing software. I titled the project, The Other Table. At first, I stared at the blank timeline, like a dinner table waiting to be set. I thought about what to start with. The gala, the speech, the lake? No. I started with the photo. A scanned print of my mother in the garden, paint on her overalls, smile wide and honest. The kind of image they'd never shown at the gala slideshow. This was the table she'd never been invited to, so I was building one she would have owned. From there, the story assembled itself. Footage of Asheville's streets, interviews layered with silent stares, the quiet tears of Miss Penner. The lake bench, my father's voice, strained but honest. Caleb's awkward confession, even Bryce's voicemail, which I hadn't planned to include. Maybe we can start from scratch. But I did. Because healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up in lowercase. Weeks later, I sat alone in my studio, candle lit, a glass of wine, the final cut played back on my screen. In the last scene, I looked into the camera. No lighting tricks, no re-recorded voiceover, just me. I used to believe that being part of a family meant having a seat at their table, that if they didn't pull out a chair for you, maybe you weren't meant to belong. But that's not true. You can build your own table and invite people who see you, fully. even if they carry scars too. I paused. Not because I didn't know what to say next, but because I finally understood the weight of saying it out loud. Blood is a thread, not a chain. And love isn't proven by inheritance. It's shown in who shows up when you're silent. So if no one saves you a seat, save one for yourself. Or better, build the damn table. Fade to black. I released the film online, not on a platform chasing algorithms, but on my personal site, where I could control how it lived. Within a week, the email started. Women from all over. Messages like, "My mother disappeared too," in silence. Or, "I never got a seat either, but I'm carving my own now." It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It reached who it had to. To those watching, if this story stirred something in you, thank you. Not for agreeing with it, but for holding space for it. Maybe your table is still empty. Maybe you're still standing at someone else's, waiting. But I promise, your voice matters, your story matters, and there is power in telling it. Even if it shakes, especially if it shakes. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Now go build your table.